and welcome to Our Life in Poetry in Search of Bewilderment. I'm Francis Levy. Ed Nurkse and I are co-directors of the Philoctetes Center. Now, before we begin this evening's readings, I'd just like to call your attention, actually, firstly, to the exhibit on the wall here, which is the Philipson Bible and Freud's Imagination. And this is really based upon an artifact of Freud's childhood, which then Freud later came back to and discussed, and it had an impact on the way he visualized things, especially in the way he thought about things. So we had a round table on Freud's psychoanalysis in the Philipson Bible. It was the Bible that his father taught him from. And that particular roundtable was last Saturday, so most of the art exhibits that we have are attendant upon these roundtables. They emerge out of the roundtables. Like we had the body as image, and that coincided with the 6 roundtables on sexuality. All of these Philoctetes programs are available online. If you miss a Philoctetes session, you just go to philoctetes.org and past programming, and you hit the button for the video, and you can see whatever is whatever you wish to see. Also, we are simulcast right now, so people actually all over the world do watch it. Like there's one person who watches it we know in Poland, and there's one person in South Africa. They actually write in, these people, and there are people now, and during the course of the roundtable, people may in fact write questions in, and we'll pass them on to the panelists. I'm now pleased to present Michael Braziller. Mike Braziller is president and publisher of Persea Books, a literary publishing company founded in 1975. Mike is also director of the Philoctetes Poetry Program. Mike Braziller will moderate this evening's panel and introduce our other distinguished guests.
We're very fortunate tonight to have 3 ample readings by 3 very gifted, important poets. And time permitting, and time will be permitting because I have my watch here, we'll look at certain aspects of their craft. We've called the evening In Pursuit of Bewilderment, and it's at the risk of generalizations, they are each innovative and experimental writers, but who go about it in their own unique and different ways. And I'm going to try to generate a dialogue in which we look at some things they do in common, some things they do differently, and how they pursue bewilderment or try to deal with bewilderment and achieve bewilderment. Now, I'll introduce, I can take a vote now. I can introduce you all 3 now and then do the readings, or we can go alphabetically and I can introduce Timothy. I'm going to introduce Timothy, and then we can decide whether I can introduce the others. Timothy Donnelly's first book of poems, 27 Props for Production of Ein Lebenszeit, was published by Grove in 2003. He has been poetry editor of Boston Review since 1995. His poems have appeared in numerous magazines and journals, including American Letters and Commentary, The Canary, Conduit, Crowd, the Denver Quarterly, Fence, Jubilat, the Literary Review, the Modern Review, the Paris Review, Pan American, Plowshares, the Public Space, Tri-Quarterly, Volt, and many others. He is on the faculty of the writing program at Columbia University's School of the Arts and lives in Brooklyn. Matthea Harvey, and you can know who that is the author of 3 books of poetry, Modern Life, Sad Little Breathing Machine, and Pity the Bathtub, Its Forced Embrace of the Human Form, and a forthcoming children's book, The Little General and the Giant Snowflake. She is contributing editor to Jubilat, Bomb, and Meat Paper. She teaches at Sarah Lawrence College and lives in Brooklyn. Dean Nurkse is the author of 9 books of poetry, most recently The Beautiful, Elegant, The Border Kingdom, which all the books are outside and they'd love to sign for you. Burnt Island fairly recently, and The Fall, all from Knopf. He has received a Guggenheim, a Whiting Writers Award, and awards from the NEA, NYFA, the Taney Foundation, and the Poetry Foundation. He also teaches at Sarah Lawrence. So we will go then this way, and Timothy, and you'll make sure to read The New Intelligence. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to read 5 poems, and I think I chose poems that I thought were differently appropriate for tonight's topic. And the first of them is the poem The New Intelligence that Michael referred to. I'll give a little bit more background to this poem than I ordinarily do. Wallace Stevens said in his Adagio that poetry is a statement of a relation between a man and the world. And this poem, to me, is just that. And this is a statement in which the world at the beginning has the upper hand. I was diagnosed with something called Meniere's syndrome about 3 years ago, and it's a disturbance of the inner ear that comes with great bouts of vertigo with it. And it was first diagnosed as Meniere's syndrome, but to outrule other possibilities, I had to undergo a battery of tests one afternoon. Tests, hearing and sight and all stuff that was sort of attempting to get at what was happening inside my head when anything happened to me. And for a while there, my doctors were quite concerned because the 13 tests, each of them, the results came back quite abnormal. And they thought there was a chance that I could have a brain tumor or a lesion on my brainstem. And for a while there, I was quite horrified, and particularly for the walk back home after hearing the news that I needed to get an MRI to outrule anything more serious than Meniere's syndrome. It was quite terrifying, and the world was just what it is. It was just the world. There was no magic in it for that time, and I felt somewhat robotic. Nothing spoke to me in a special way, and it felt like a great defeat because my imagination, I feel, is all that I've ever really had. That was mine and mine alone. And so, as I say, for a while, the world was merely that, the world, nothing magical. And I wrote this poem as a way to sort of move through that. And it's called The New Intelligence. After knowledge extinguished the last of the beautiful, fires are, I should say I'm fine, and it was just Meniere's syndrome. They determined that my predicament is that I interpret sense data very idiosyncratically. And when I told that to people who know me, they said, we know. And the new intelligence. After knowledge extinguished the last of the beautiful, fires our worship had failed to prolong, we walked back home through pedestrian daylight to a residence humbler than the one left behind, a door without mystery, a room without theme. For the hour that we spend complacent at the window overlooking the garden, we observe an arrangement in rust and gray-green, a vagueness at the center whose slow, persistent movements some sentence might explain if we had time or strength for sentences, to admit that what falls, falls solitarily, lost in the permanent dusk of the particular, that the mind that fear in disenchantment fattens comes to boss the world around it, ugly as the damp-fingered guest who rearranges the cheeses the minute the host turns to fix her a cocktail, a disease of the will, the way the false birch branches arch and interlace from which hands dangle the last leaf parchments and a very large array of primitive bird shapes. Their pasted feathers shake in the aftermath of the nothing we will ever be content to leave the way we found it. I love that about you. I love that when I call you on the long, drab days practicality keeps one of us away from the other, that I am calling a person so beautiful to me that she has seen my awkwardness on the actual sidewalk, but she still answers anyway. I say that when I fell, you fell beside me in the concrete, refused to apologize, that a sparrow sat for a spell on the windowsill today to communicate the new intelligence, that the goal of objectivity depends upon one's faith in the accuracy of one's perceptions, which is to say, a confidence in the purity of the perceiving instrument. I won't be dying after all, not now, but will go on living dizzily, hereafter in reality, half deaf to reality, in the room perfumed by the fire that our inextinguishable will begins. This next poem that I'll read is addressed to a very big fact of my life, and
what book is it in?
this is free floating. This is not in the book.
Okay,
It's something that is at once abstract and painfully real, and that would be my debt. And I mean that literally, I mean that financially. And it needed talking to, but in order to talk to it, I needed to transform it into something that would hear me. It needed to be figured. And this poem is called To His Debt. I like repurposing that phrase, to one's debt, to his debt, and turning it into an address rather than a figure of speech. To his debt. Where would I be without you, massive shadow dressed in numbers, when without you there behind me, I wouldn't be myself? What wealth could ever offer loyalty like yours? My measurement, my history, my backdrop against which every coffee and kerplunk, when all the giddy whoring around, abroad, and after the more money money wants, is among the first things you prevent. My phantom, my crevasse, my emphatically unfunny hippopotamus. You take my last red cent and drag it down into the muck of you. My sassafras, my Timbuktu. You who put the kibosh on fine dining and home theater, dentistry and work, my head into a lather, throw my ever-beaten back against a mattress of intractable topography, and chew. Make death with me. My sugar boat set loose on caustic indigo, my circumstance dissolving. Even then, how could solvency hope to come between us when, even when I dream, I awaken in an unmarked pocket of the earth? Without you there you are, supernaturally redoubling over my shoulder like the living wage I never make, but whose image I will always cling to in the negative, hanged up by the feet among the mineral about me, famished like a bat, whose custom it is to make much of my neck. This next poem, I sought to represent a sense of estrangement that finds its expression in a rather methodical presentation of a time and place wholly unlike my actual reality. What does that mean? Well, you'll see. And yet it is a time and place that is in many ways quite present to my mind, the time being long ago and the place being Mesopotamia, a region of the globe that's been on our minds for a long time now. And I think of this poem, too, as my own kind of homage to Elizabeth Bishop's over 2,000 illustrations in a complete concordance, a poem that I have great affection for. And this is called Between the Rivers, which is how Mesopotamia translates. Between the Rivers. Maybe there's a stage in wakefulness like standing up on a rooftop I've never quite been able to figure out how to get to. And it's from this stage that everyone keeps shouting at me, saying, look how beautiful the day turned out after all, how in the distance the enemy battalions are surrendering, and not a cloud in the sky. What was I so worked up about? The villagers below raise cattle, sheep, and goats, grow barley, wheat, and flax, and produce distinctive pottery. Pistachio nuts thrive in the irrigated gardens of our city, as do pomegranates, naturally rich in antioxidants, which protect the body from free radicals' interference with normal cell function. Observation confirms that our chief building material is mud brick left to bake in the sun, and with reason. Both mud and sun prove plentiful year-round, and the bricks excel at keeping out the heat. A large harvest of reeds drawn from the river to roof our houses also provides long-lasting baskets, cradles, musical pipes, and the wedge-shaped stylus with which we write on soft clay tablets. The clay, too, is taken from the river. Writing comes from our accountants. Hunting for food continues in the wetlands, the forests, and the mountains, but in the walled cities on the plains, it has become something more of a ritual display of bravery, affluence, and the favor of the gods, who are the subjects of the greater part of all our artwork, along with warfare, mythic beasts, rulers, and palace life. And yet, here we find a fragment of glazed earthenware depicting a simple mountain goat, and here a young archer wears a headband, a richly decorated tunic, and fine sandals. Such archers are known for shooting arrows backwards and with great accuracy from the saddle, even in gallop. That figure of a winged bull with human face was given a fifth leg to provide the creature with a sense of motion. Our massive step pyramids, representative of mountains, can be seen from a great distance across the flat landscape. At the top of each pyramid rests a temple glazed in indigo, where the gods are known to dwell. Here is the river from which we crawl, there the next into which we one day dissolve. Music marks state occasions and serves to glorify the gods, but the villagers enjoy non-ceremonial strains of it as well. No one can be sure what sounds our instruments produce, but we have theories about scales and tuning, astronomy, mathematics, geography, which gems to wear to ward off sickness and which to protect against thunderbolts and spirits. When you see the king depicted balancing a basket of clay effortlessly atop his tranquil head, this means it was he who built our city's walls and many sparkling temples. We have come into contact with other peoples through trade and migration, but mostly warfare. If we are remembered as cruel, ruthless warriors, were we not also scholars, restless artists and lovers of art, obedient citizens, builders of cities unmatched in magnificence, pious worshippers of the gods? To the left and right of the city gate, a beneficent winged genie holds a large pine cone used to sprinkle a blessing of water on the heads of those who enter our city. Is it not reasonable to suppose the same blessing is bestowed on those who leave? Two more poems. This next is a villanelle. And I was provoked by, I was watching a documentary on torture and late at night, and there was a quote that snapped me into a different state of consciousness, and it came from a diplomat, a Cold War diplomat named George Kennan, and I'll paraphrase. He said that the greatest risk facing the American people is the threat that we will become like those who seek to destroy us. And when I heard that phrase, we become like those who seek to destroy us, something told me I needed to write a villanelle. And I think of this as a poem of estrangement from oneself. Claire, and I call it Claire de Lune. We revolt ourselves, we disgust and annoy us. The way we look at us lately chills us to the core. We become like those who seek to destroy us. We push ourselves into small tasks that employ us unrewardingly on purpose. We tire, we bore, we revolt ourselves, we disgust and annoy us. We rent ourselves to what force will enjoy us into oblivion. Wind, drink, sleep. We pimp, we whore, we become like those who seek to destroy us. We cat and mouse, roughhouse, inflatable toy us in our head's red maze, in its den, on its shore. We revolt ourselves, we disgust and annoy us. We take offense at our being, we plot, we deploy us, against us and flummox. We wallow, we war. We become like those who seek to destroy us. If in triumph our defeat, in torture our joy is, some confusion so deep I can't fathom anymore. We appall ourselves, we disgust and annoy us into those we become, we who seek to destroy us. And the last poem I'll read is a poem that was it's an experiment, really, in estranging language from its original context. What I did was I took all the pages of Shelley's defensive poetry, and once per page, every page provided me with the lexicon, the words that I needed, with which I could build a tercet. As many pages as there were, as many tercets I wrote. And once per line, I was allowed a word from another text. And the other text I chose for this was a chapter from the 9/11 Commission report on building America's defenses in a time of war, and playing with Shelley's defense. As pendulum, as wind, as an ever-changing mutual voice, as consciousness, sympathies, chords of speculation, as to prolong speculation, plastic and within, as copious as infancy, as infrastructure to the most invisible, indestructible flower, and infinite as pleasure apprehended through excess, as cross-fertilization of intelligence and cloud, and as light, and as energy, as all related instruments indispensable indispensable to choruses, as being differently indispensable, as being harmonious, whatever echo, cadence, or strain from the catalog of meaningful music deep in the midst of its composition, a proposal for living, an epitome, a permanent spark through American darkness, barbarous as nightingale, awakened in a laboratory, hidden from the world in its thousand details, as ancient armor around the body, deformed by protection, as pains against fragments in an epoch of drama, as danger period, a distorted history, as dance without music, as passion without capacity, as exactness equal to any example, as under this thin guise of circumstance, as if internal Minneapolis, as enlarged by sorrow, terror, wheresoever I decline, as against decay of liberties, as against misapplication, monster propagating in the extinction of softness, as overzealous as a number, as when the degradation distributes itself as workforce venom, paralyzing citizens in vivid architecture, as from the great faculty an effluence is set forth, as episodes, as footsteps, whatever evil agencies will thicken and exacerbate, bewildered anomalies, extraordinary drawbacks, as convulsions nourishing their course with strength and expeditiously, as national vapors, as theater wrecks, as at successive intervals the exhausted population penetrated caverns, at drowse, at impossible to feel, the full in the sensible, as in paradise, but as in at inmost a starry flock, at connection and attaché, in the still overflowing inextinguishable source, as first written waters, as burning information, we can advance the fountain, we can define foundation, as awakened a shadow, as a vessel of assurance, let portions of our being, let chapter the invention. We want more brightness than money can imagine. We want what arises from the passages between mind management and the exasperation of anatomy. Yoke evanescent wonder, reanimate the blunted. The mind which directs the hand is not vanishing. Let laundering, let mechanism turn to potable song and highest human flight, as illustrious as trumpets awakening washed garments, as manifestations of the long electric work. Let gathering a nation. Let the end of the battle be astonished birth of person. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yes, just...
Is this working? Yes. Moments of bewilderment come from dreams. So the first poem I'm going to read is a poem based on a dream that I had about little flowers made out of ham. Implications for modern life. The ham flowers have veins and are rimmed in rind, each petal a little meat sunset. I deny all connection with the ham flowers, the barge floating by loaded with lard, the white flagstones like platelets in the blood-red road. I'll put the calves in coats so the ravens can't gore them, bandage up the cut gate, and when the wind rustles its muscles, I'll gather the seeds and burn them. But then I see a horse lying on the side of the road and think, you are sleeping, I will make you be sleeping. But if I didn't make the ham flowers, how can I make him get up? I made the ham flowers. Get up, dear animal. Here is your pasture flecked with pink, your oily river, your bleeding barn. Decide what to look at and how. If you lower your lashes, the blood looks like mud. If you stay, I will find you fresh hay. This next one is titled Estamos en vivo, no hay alternativo, which
What page is that? I'm sorry, what page is it?
I don't know, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry,
That's
because
okay.
I know it's in here.
It is in there.
You might want to speak up a little louder.
Really? Okay. Oh, maybe if I go down a little. All right, can you hear me now? Okay, so this one was actually written in a rather bewildering situation. I was in Cusco, Peru, and I had horrible altitude sickness, and I was watching Wimbledon on television between throwing up. For some reason, being alive right then didn't seem that great. And I was sort of interested in the idea of the fact that we're forced to be. Translation is also a little bit off because it should be alternativa, but for the rhyme. Estamos en vivo, no hay alternativo. Down here in the land of slammed doors, the factory puffs its own set of clouds into the sky. Fake larks fly through them, lifelike. Let's not go into contractions of can't and won't, or how behind the line of trees the forest is gone. Dip that tiny brush into your paint box and mix up something nice and muddy for me. We've got a lock on the moon, so now it goes where we want it, mostly proms, sometimes lobbies. This is my favorite sign. Live girls, live action, and in smaller but still flashing lights, girl on girl, girl on blank. Among the permutations, there's no girl on hands and knees begging for her life. No one we know wants it that badly. I am sort of intrigued by the idea of when things emerged in the world, like when love could have emerged, for example. So I decided to imagine what it must have been like between a cave woman and a caveman, the first glimmerings of love, which really just have to do with wanting food. But anyway. The invention of love. The cave woman and caveman lie side by side. They bump globes sadly. The forest is just the forest outside. I am hungry, one gestures. I am hungry too, gestures the other. All right, this one is about, I think, trying to be in the middle of things. I read a lot about different hybrids and centaurs and cat goats and other creations, but this one is about kind of trying to live in the very middle of all those divisions. Setting the table. To cut through night, you'll need your sharpest scissors. Cut around the birch, the bump of the bird nest on its lowest limb. Then, with your nail scissors, trim around the baby beaks, waiting for worms to fall from the sky. Snip around the lip of the mailbox and the pervert's shoe peeking out from behind the Chevy. Before dawn, rip the silhouette from the sky and drag it inside. Frame the long black stripe and hang it in the dining room. Sleep. When you wake, redo the scene as day in doily. Now you have a lacy fence, a huge cherry blossom of a holly bush, a birch sugared with snow. Frame the white version and hang it opposite the black. Get your dinner and eat it between the two scenes. Your food will taste just right. See, how am I doing for time?
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah.
You're fine, yeah.
Okay. So I thought I should read one of the hybrid poems. The first inventions of hybrid animals in a slightly alternate universe. How we learned to hold hands. We halved them because we could. It turned out anything with 4 legs could wobble along on 2. Anything with 2 could hop along on 1. Leopards, horses, kangaroos, front, back, it didn't matter. Mostly it was teenagers with their parents' Christmas knives who did the cutting. No one knew where the keepers came from, but they favored covered wagons with billowing sheets tucked in at the edges, puckering like a healing wound. They tied scarves tightly around their chins, men and women, as if to hold the hemispheres of their own heads together. At first, they hid the hybrids from us. Their first clumsiest attempts were the most marvelous: front ostrich, back deer, wind ruffling through first feathers, then fur, and the cat goat, all front, who patrolled the shop windows. When the sun hit at a certain angle, the battle would begin, cat wanting to see its cat reflection, goat wanting to see goat. There's also a creature in here called Robo-Boy, and he's half robot, half boy. So, yeah. And in this one, we're thinking about the people his parents have chosen for him as role models who are also divided. I've always been interested in the idea of, Mr. Peanut and these people who are they're the thing that you're going to eat. So chicken selling the fact that you should eat chicken. So anyway, they're sort of halved as well. Emphasis on Mr. or Peanut, Robo or Boy. In the chapters on special children, the parenting books stress the need for role models. Hence the silver frame portraits of Mr. Peanut, the Michelin Man, and Mrs. Butterworth in silver frames on Robo-Boy's bureau. Robo-Boy has never quite known what to do with them. For a while, he thought they might be estranged relatives, especially since his parents never mentioned them. Mr. Peanut, debonair as Fred Astaire, looks like the kind of uncle who might tell you over steak and a cigar that with a pair of gloves and a monocle slotted over your eye socket, you can have your pick of the ladies. Mrs. Butterworth figured more in Robo-Boy's brief religious phase. There's something holy in her maple syrup glow, and in her shape, something of the Buddha. The Michelin Man is the one who worries him. With his perpetual thumbs up and cheerful expression, he looks like he might be hoping to hitchhike his way the hell out of here. And the last one I'll read is one of the shortest ones. Page 58.
Thank you.
I finally remembered to tell you. Do you understand? No gray rainbow over the blackened land. Thanks.
Well, thank you, poets. I will read for about 12 minutes. I apologize to be reading to some of you with the back of my head. It's a moral dilemma of reading in the center of a round room. I feel like a French horn that...
You can put your glasses on backwards.
Oh, you're confusing me. You're bewildering me. But I think this is a very real topic. One of the things that's so beautiful about poetry is I think none of us really trust our minds, let alone our bodies or our souls. And in poetry, you can work with the untrustworthy self. You don't work with the perfect self. It's a contaminated art form, an impure art form. So in some ways, I think it's a really realistic art form as opposed to me, in the narrative, you really have to construct a self and bear out that self, whereas in poems, you can be divided. I think a real subject of ignorance to me is love, so I'm going to read some love poems. Picnic by the Inland Sea. We understood we were hurtling into space at 18 miles per second. Clouds of atoms charged and polarized, each alone in the abyss, and you wore your summer dress. The light under the poplar was mottled, but the shade of the pines was feathered. We were bundles of self-canceling voices, flight and response, punishment and reward, hostile adoration, panic and certainty from long before the Bronze Age. Yet we made our own promises by suppressed coughs or sneezes and sat a little apart, but sometimes our eyes brushed. We sipped Montepulciano from a paper cup until the bottom darkened, but still it was not evening, still the world was ending. Always we resented the breeze for choosing and marking us. Still a short song too short to sing moved two famished sparrows like pawns from branch to branch.
Could I ask you, would you mind repeating or paraphrasing some of the introductory things you said in relation to that poem? In other words, you said something about with a novel you have to create a whole person, but
yeah, it's just a thought.
Yeah.
It's not a theory.
Yeah.
But the theory is that in a poem you can write with all the fragments of yourself. You don't really have to construct an authorial self or a narrative in which the self is realized. There can be radical doubt in your work, but
maybe later we'll return to this poem in light of what
Sure.
you just said. I think that's introduction or entry, a useful, very useful entry into what you've done there. So.
And this poem to me is also about the strangeness of reality. I mean, we are moving at 18 miles per second, so that most of our lives is a metaphor. You know, the status that we are sitting here in a round room reading poetry is a metaphor. We're actually falling at 18 miles a second through space, and our minds have not changed at all in 30,000 years. People wonder what changed our brains in any way, and the last change people think was the subjunctive clause, which must have really changed the mind. The possibility of saying they might be jackals behind that hill, as opposed to say they are or there are not jackals behind that hill. I'll read a few very bewildered love poems. Late summer. When the rain woke me, I no longer knew and had to remind myself. This is darkness, this is the wine glass, that is the blowing curtain, that's the immense city. It is late in my life, but early in August. This is my wife naked in my arms. And that is bewilderment, when you have to remind yourself what darkness is. This is a love poem called A Week in the Capital, and it's thematic. They knew each other less and less. It was like the deliberate ignorance you might entertain concerning God. That uncertainty bound them. They had thought love would mean knowing. Sometimes they consulted maps or took pictures of each other with a small boxy Polaroid. Mostly they just listened to the wind until it no longer sounded like a voice. The shadows that touched each other so gingerly had no confidence in their bodies. They studied the wallpaper, the great labor absent in it, how the seams met exactly and the paper hydrangea buckled. They decoded the trowel marks. Any blemish was a comfort. They were exhausted from staring up or down at the same shiny pupil. They memorized the half-light. In days to come, it would be the guide, the one they remembered, of whom they could say, "We sheltered each other for 6 days in a small room with a loud fan, in a city which refused to end, but continued by vaulted bridges into the past, the future, the present itself, unknowable and stubborn as the heartbeat in the womb." And when I read that line, they memorized the half-light, I was thinking of a line by Emmanuel Levinas where he says, our conscience is not really conscience, it is a twilight. You know, whoops, that was very dramatic. He didn't do that sound effect, but that idea that our minds are twilight rather than an investigative tool was intimidating. I'm going to read a poem that has another form of experiment, which is you might inhabit a landscape with the eye and identify with things that are unusual. So this is a poem that identifies with, among other things, sand, lugworms, and barnacles. And some critics really thought you're going to be kidding, but so be it. It's called 5 Marine Solitudes, and it's an ocean poem. The sand lugworm. And each is in the voice of that creature. The sand lugworm. We dream of the part of ourselves that the gull bit away so intensely it grows back. Everything in the world is a wing, a claw, a coat of scales. We have no defense except this trance in which we return to the body, the shape of the wound, and fit in our carefully sculpted tunnel except for our protruding heads. Also, we give off light. Boat shells. locked in our armor and forged in a chain. Slowly we change from male to female as the wind shifts, and Burt Island darkens from blue to slate. Barnacles, if we could rest for a moment from our grievance against the racing clouds, if we could rest from being white, if we could rest from resting, if there were a way not to cling, if there were an exercise we could practice so as not to be held by our intentions, there would be no shore. The wave, I ruled this world until the sea slug discovered that it suffers. And in a way, I think of these poems as the strangeness of scientific reality, too. The boat slugs do change from male to female. The boat shells and the wave did rule the world until the sea slug discovered that it suffers, by which I mean us, human beings, figuring out that we are divided, which is really, consciousness comes from division. We're left-handed and right-handed so that we know that we're weak. We know that we have parts of ourselves that are not adequate. I have a dog that I hang out with who, the dog, for good reason, thinks he's perfect. You know, there's not a part of the dog which is inferior to another part of the dog. I'm going to conclude with one last poem which thematically speaks to some of the poems that I've been hearing. This is a poem about interrogation. It's set in Iraq, and it's just another way of trying to understand the present. Ben Adan. The American commanded me in gestures, dig a hole. He tossed me a shovel, but the blade had dulled, and the haft was splaying, so I had to rein in that strange, wild energy as I opened the earth to my shin, then my knees. At thigh depth I found a layer of black loam and a tiny blue snail that seemed to give off light. The agent called my name. High above he mimed a man kneeling, hands clasped in prayer. He must have knelt himself because I felt the muzzle pressed against the shallow furrow behind my left earlobe, a part of my body I never knew existed. He pulled the trigger, but I know it is just a technique to soften my resistance. Perhaps in a moment he will lift me up and hold me trembling, more scared than I and more relieved.
Very good. I began by saying that firstly, the poems speak for themselves, and this was a wonderful reading. As a generalization, I could say these three writers are experimental, and what I mean by that, or just as a general thing, is that we're not looking at a window. They're not directly confessional poems. There's not a window upon reality. They're coming at things inventively and indirectly. And most importantly, and interestingly, I think that they experiment in different ways. If you could all even just look at their poems on the page, if you have the books in front of you, or if you buy the books later, the poems really look differently. All three, Timothy, I think it's fair to say, a great interest in form, or particularly, in fixed stanzas and rather conventional form. You're doing a lot of prose poems, and you're somewhere sort of in between, and I think rather spare. Mm-hmm. Can this get us started? I mean, how do we begin? I mean, can you talk a bit about why don't we start here with your departure from and your interest in, strict form and
Absolutely.
Okay.
A certain amount of regularity in line length and stanzaic shapes and whatnot, using conventional forms like the villanelle or like the sonnet has always been very important to me. My own imagination tends to veer off and to be quite centrifugal, and so I've always felt the need for some rigor, some regulation, something to sort of give a sense of organization to my own meandering.
Would you say that in a way it's adhesive, it holds together, or it can, as you were, I think you are saying, it sort of balances what can be not word play, but a poetry of words in a way?
For sure. And at some point, you set up for yourself a certain kind of formal expectation, and the thrill is realizing those expectations or even surpassing them. I've just always, I don't want to say I've relied upon it, but I've always taken advantage of it as a resource, a certain amount of structural foothold. And I like that in the poems that I read as well. I think it gives me a sense of focus even when I'm at my most uncertain. But then throughout my work, I'm usually I can be held accountable for what I've done. And I usually know what I'm up to. But I need some kind of physical force to rein me in. Yeah, I need a physical force to rein me in. God knows what I'll do.
Can you remember the Wallace Stevens quote that you began with? In just keeping in mind what you've just said and what you're going after with this belt. What was that? What was it? About
a poem being like a document of the relation between a man and the world.
Right.
I think that might be less. I guess there's a way I could twist that to speak to my interest in form, but I think of sort of every poem that I set out to write in one way or another seeks to represent my own way of having it, of seeing it, of experiencing the world. And part of what I do need, or what I do take advantage of in making those presentations, those representations, would be a kind of formal regularity. It's I don't know. I wouldn't know when to stop or when I was done if I couldn't look at it and say, yes, that's how it should look. And I use the same thing with my ear, with a certain attentiveness to sound. If it doesn't sound quite right to me on some physical level, I can't. There are places in the book, for example, I can show you lines that I still am not satisfied with and probably should have toyed around with, but at some point you have to relinquish it. I needed to look into sound the way I needed to look into sound. God damn it. Yeah.
I think I have something to say to that, because I'm also interested in form, but I think maybe we come at it from a really different place, because often I like to just make up some kind of formal thing for myself, but it's usually, I think, in order to take me farther away from myself. So that the prose poem aside, the prose poem I think of as like a little problematic box that makes everyone really nervous, and so I really like that. People don't know whether it's poetry or prose, but I think when I set up some sort of formal thing for myself, it's, for example, I wrote a series of poems that are abecedarian poems, which means they're rough abecedarian poems, but they were generated by making lists of the words between terror and future and terror in the dictionary. And I think that for me, it's almost like I have such a narrative control thing going on that to get pushed away and towards other words is kind of a freedom. It takes me in a different place. So we're coming at it from the opposite angles, but
yeah.
I think that's one of the very interesting. I mean, there's tremendous. Seems to be a joy or a pleasure in creating these hybrids, or completely strange or unexpected turns and connections and associations. Is that fair to say?
I think that's true. I think in the prose poems for me, some of them, they feel like I take one surreal step and then I spend the rest of the poem figuring out how that would affect the world. So if the world is ruled by the theory of the baked Alaska, which is that everything's hot on the outside and cold on the inside, then what are the repercussions for the world? But I think with a poem like Implications for Modern Life, that was quite different. It wasn't, I didn't know where it was going at all, which is always my favorite experience.
Are you conscious of music tonally? Are you listening for tone? Or are you visual? Are you focusing mostly on what you're seeing or looking at or inventing? Or
I think all of those things. I mean, I think the invention is really important, the sound is important, and often, the perception and the visual description is important. Hard to make a hierarchy. It depends on a particular poem, I guess.
Right. In contrast, and your music sounds sort of. You are. Do you think of yourself as an intensely lyrical, as lyric poems, and say in contrast to?
I would love to. If you give me it, I'll take it, sure. No, I think all these poems that we've heard have been lyrical poems. I mean, sort of Picasso said, they don't make a new kind of beauty every day. We don't really get too far from the lyric, the epic.
Do you want to go back to that opening poem that we talked about? You began with Picnic by the Inland Sea. Tonally, it struck me as I don't know, I'm just going to say this, but I'm not sure, but as a love poem, is a very tender and loving poem, a love poem. And yet, is there a subject there? Is there a there? Or isn't the music kind of? How would you characterize the tone of the poem, or what is the feeling within the poem?
Well, I think I would say it's a love poem, though. As I look at the poem, there's a certain kind of negative space to it in that everything in the poem is in the past. So it's speaking to another person, but it's about a moment that just whirled by, so that moment is no longer accessible.
Is there a subject to the poem? Do you know what I mean? Is there a time and a place, or is it what holds it together, or what?
Well, I think it's probably the tension between a classic situation of a couple, and I think the poem is emotionally invested in that couple, and then just the idea of being on a falling stone, whizzing along with other falling stones.
In your work, I think you are wonderfully bewildered by this world.
Oh, yeah.
I think, like your poem, is it the Red Twin or the
Well, would you say, could I take that further? It's a poem of memory, and your poem, and you could say some of them are a poem of an imagined future, or imagined poem of the imagination, and this seems to depend upon something that as you were saying, something that happened way back then. The summer dress, the shadow of the pine needles. There seems to be something of personal recollection in it.
Yeah, I think you're really in touch with your personal, in the world bewilderment, which I think is a beautiful thing. Like the idea of the poem, that you have a poem about learning to ride the bicycle and not learning how to ride the bicycle, instead carrying the bicycle in the end. And
the Schwinn.
Yeah, the Schwinn. I think that sort of these misunderstandings in regular life, what you do fantastically
Right,
well and
right.
intrigue me.
Well, thank you. I mean, I am authentically bewildered. I once was in
In reality, you're bewildered.
I once was in Finland, and there was a tower, and it was sort of on the Russian border, and it was twilight, and there was a sign that said in English, "Stairs up." So I climbed up to the top of the tower, and I looked around, and I thought, oh my God, there were stairs up, but no stairs down. How do I get out of here? No, that's bewilderment.
Yeah, exactly.
I did figure it out, though. I'm still here.
You were going to read a quote, the great quote.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm really interested in bewilderment. I love the idea of celebrating bewilderment instead of sort of the, take that to the know-it-alls of the world. I think that there's a beauty in bewilderment and something to be celebrated. And so there's this great essay by Fanny Howe called Bewilderment in her book, The Wedding Dress. And there are all sorts of great quotes, but this has always stuck with me. There is a Muslim prayer that says, "Lord, increase my bewilderment." And this prayer is both mine and the strange whoever goes under the name of I in my poems, and under multiple names in my fiction, where error, errancy, and bewilderment are the main forces that signal a story.
Lord, the prayer is what? Lord, send more.
Lord, increase my bewilderment.
Increase my bewilderment. You know what I interpret that to mean? Is that existence is so baffling, is such a mystery, that the most intense experience is to be bewildered, is to know nothing.
Right, and it's sort of like when you go to a foreign country and suddenly everything's confusing and you don't know how to use the subway, and you realize that you walk around the world feeling very in control, like this is what I do, and you don't even step back to think, how strange that I have a little card that I run through this slot and then I go through a turnstile and I get on this moving creature. There are things...
There's something incredibly beautiful in such...
Mike, we allowed to interject at all?
Oh, please. Well, no, you can't. And you in particular can't. I'm kidding.
I just want to say that when you
Yeah.
proposed the idea for
Yeah.
this particular roundtable, it sort of reminded me a little bit, was it Rimbaud who talked about the dérangement des sens, the derangement of the senses? And I think it's an aesthetic proposition that applies not only to poetry, but to all artistic forms in which you sort of rediscover the familiar. That is to say that the mind encapsulates objects and finds ways in which to handle the world. And in this particular sense, and your poem was a metaphor for me for the whole proposition that we're doing here, because the condition that you suffered from, in a way, made you kind of have to reconstruct and reconstruct reality. I think it was beautifully done, by the way.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's something that you can look at Rimbaud with the dérèglement des sens. You can look at someone like Victor Shklovsky talking about the deadening effects of habit and routine on our psyches. The fact that, you said that the world is a mysterious, beautiful place, but we can't feel that all the time.
That's right.
We become deadened to that fact. And I do
It
think
is why
that
we go away. It is why we go someplace else.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course it is. I hadn't even thought about that because I refuse to go away. And I get that feeling, from art, from poetry is one of my favorite places to turn to for that feeling, for that sense of being refreshed and to be reawakened to the mystery of being here to begin with. And I think I'm teaching a course now in the elegy, and we keep on coming up against this again and again and again. That's one of the things that poetry can do. One of the forms of language in which that happens most frequently is that all of these the deadening effects of habituation become stripped away through a certain kind of language use. We use language all the time instrumentally to get us, to have someone pass the salt across the table, to ask for our clothing at the dry cleaners. It's this tool, it's this magnificent thing that we've invented, but we forget that it's an invention. We forget that it has this strange life of its own, because it's always doing things for us, and we can always use it to point at things that we want or need, etc. But here in poetry, it's doing perhaps that some of the time, but also something else. I think that, to my taste, a poem is always going to sort of really have not just the indicative in on its mind, but it will also want to roil in its own physicality to a certain degree, reminding us of this beast that we've invented that is language, which isn't just a pointer, but another kind of dog as well. And that's, I love it when you say that you use form to get away from yourself, or sometimes I'm sure it's never always the same thing. But I think in this egotistical way, and I'm afraid that I might be egotistical, that I use form sometimes, if it's something like that, to discover new parts of myself, to discover, things that are in there, or that feel like they're in there, but haven't really come to the threshold of the articulate just yet. I feel like there's always such a mess going on in my head, and even just a little bit lower, that I do. One of the things I get out of poems is this obsessive, compulsive need to sort of perfect the mishigas in my skull, and it really it helps me that way. And it's you know what I'm saying.
Are there any? Feel free. If you'd like to ask them questions. I know, time permitting, one thing to do, I don't know, where are we with time? Oh, we're still early. One thing we could do, if you wouldn't mind, I've asked them all to focus on one poem. And most readings are hard, are difficult. This is first time, audience might be hearing it. The 3 poems they've chosen are relatively short. And would it be okay to read them again? And we can either end on that, or we can look a little more closely, rather than talking theoretically, we can look a little more closely at a few little things in those poems that deal with this experimentation and with an approach with each of your individual approach. Would that be all right?
Sounds nice, yeah.
Okay.
Must be great. But there must be some questions from the audience. We can't have
They're bewildered. They're completely bewildered. Yes, go ahead.
I'm just sort of curious about the word or the notion of bewilderment and what it means to you, because I just wondered about wildness or wilderness or desert, or back to the beginning of something, or away from civilization, or just a place of not knowing, and what it means or how it figures in your psyche and in your work as a place to land or take other people.
I like the idea of the bewilderness, exploring it as an actual sort of realm. I think it's partly just something. It's almost a process. Being bewildered while writing the poem is almost the exciting discovery. Is if you do become bewildered by your poem, if you feel really in control of it, that's not very exciting. And I think, in a way, I do think of it as wilderness, because we don't really have that experience of being lost in forests very often anymore. We have GPS, we have cell phones, but I think in the little mazes that the brain makes, that's where you can get lost and bewildered. So sort of a brain space for me, I think.
Some of us can get lost in very small spaces, but
Are you good at that?
yeah.
Yeah, actually, I have no
also,
sense of
like,
direction either, but
That whole sort of mystic theme of St. John of the Cross, the fountain in the darkness, and that's, how he apprehends the absolute as a fountain that keeps rising in absolute darkness. I think that's just wow, I admire that image, but, there's a via negativa that is part of mystical thinking, where you just look at everything and almost radically question it. This chair, no, not a chair. A table, not a table. It's a method, again, of getting back in touch with this strangeness of the world, and the strangeness of death, too. I mean, just to be finite, to have minds that are not particularly finite and yet to be finite, that's a pretty serious contradiction. To have feelings about other people that may not be finite, but those people about which you have those feelings are finite.
Yeah, and what you say, the idea of bewilderment is to wilder, and to make one lose one's way, or to fall, or to move off the well-trodden path. And I think that when we allow ourselves to get a little lost, or to veer off into the strange, or to cut through the woods rather than take, the clearly demarked zone, or the clearly demarked route that we've all taken over and over and over, and again with the idea of habit. Sure, I do believe that that's, to me, that's one of the main duties, the main responsibilities of the poem or of the poet, is to take us to a place, or put us in a state of mind that is unlike the one that we are, the workaday frame of mind, and to allow us to see things differently. There's a wonderful essay by Paul Valéry called Poetry and Abstract Thought, and in it he says that people have this sort of this adopted notion of that the poet is walking around in all kinds of states of reverie and wonder, wide-eyed and attentive to all these strains of music that only he or she can hear. And he, at an interesting part early on in the essay, he says, and that of course, that abstract thought is a completely different realm altogether, and the poet doesn't really have much truck in that realm. They don't use that kind of thinking, they do the other thing. And he says, in fact, is that poets do use that kind of thinking, abstract thought, and sort of the left-brained stuff. And he says that rather than remaining always in those states of wonder and confusion and dream that we think of the poet as always remaining in, it is instead the poet's responsibility to create that state in the reader. And we may be very conscious of seeking out to create that effect in the reader in whatever way we hope to do so. But he suggests towards the end of the essay that ways in which to do that become a little bit something like second nature in poets, But absolutely, I think that that's what it's all about, poetry, to do that, to reawaken, to shake the scales off our eyes, and to burst out of this hold that habit has on us, for sure.
That's why I often have students of mine write poems in the voices of aliens, because I think that if, like, for example, if an alien landed right now, what on earth would they think was going on? Well, it would depend on what appendages they have, if they're this big, if they're gigantic, but completely everything would be called into question and made unfamiliar. And so I love alien poems. I think that Mae Swenson and Anthony McCann both have fantastic alien poems. I'm always looking for new ones.
Well, let's ask the aliens in the audience what they're thinking.
Yeah, there's some questions back there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah.
There's a gentleman first. I'm wondering whether the panelists would like to consider the relationship between bewilderment and mystery, and whether one is a quantitative difference or a qualitative difference involved in the two, from the poet's perspective.
I hear the word mystery, and what comes to mind is solution. And that when I hear the word bewilderment, I don't think that there's a solution to it. It's a kind of state you hope to sometimes be in and you fall out of, but as is necessary. But I do think that they're in the same ballpark, truly. To be bewildered is to be put in a state of mystery, but not the kind of mystery that you feel the need to solve or get to the bottom of. You know what I'm saying? That's my feeling.
In art, you can have it's an interesting thought, but I think about it a lot, is that you can have a clear mystery or a confusing mystery, and that's an artistic distinction. You know what I mean? You can write something that is very clear but mysterious, or you can write something that is unclearly mysterious. It's mysterious because the polyvalent meanings are just confusing, but you can ideally write something that is really crystalline but completely mysterious too.
I think it is close to Freud's take on the uncanny, the familiar made strange again. What we're talking about, bewilderment and shaking off the grasp of habit.
I'd like to read you one thing from Ralph Waldo Emerson, which relates a little bit. He says, the inaccessibleness of every thought but that we are in is wonderful. What if you come near to it, you are as remote when you are nearest as when you are furthest. Every thought is also a prison. Every heaven is also a prison. Therefore we love the poet. And part of that is the idea that whenever we formulate something in language, we're suppressing thousands of other thoughts, and that is very frustrating to us. And maybe in poetry there's a chance to also access some of those suppressed thoughts or counter thoughts that normally we just push into the margins.
I guess I wanted to ask you guys to maybe talk about the importance of control in the process of creating this poetic and artificial and creative movement. I think like probably other writers or poets, when I was younger, I've always been obsessed with the opaque, the dense, all the things that my teachers scolded me for because I had a bad sense of grammar. And so when I was a younger writer, I think all of my obsession with kind of being unclear and kind of being puzzling was as much a part of what I just couldn't mechanically or technically do or master with the language. And I like to think I've come some way with that, and that the kind of the bewilderment or the confusion or the kind of mystery that exists now as a poet in my work and the poetry I love it has a lot more to do with mastery and control. And the Rimbaud phrase always comes to mind, and it wasn't until one of my teachers pointed out that the phrase is, I don't know French at all, the phrase is actually a rational derangement of the senses, as if that didn't make it more confusing. It's not just a bunch of people howling at the moon here. There's something in Rimbaud that wants to kind of dissect and anatomically take apart the mind and do it very methodically. I can't help kind of mentioning Ashbery, because I think he's the great poet of bewilderment of our time, and he's kind of made the poem a very bewildered thing for very many years. Everyone always says, well, I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
Yes.
But I think what's so wonderful about Ashbery is that you don't know what the hell he's talking about, but it's always in the same way that you kind of don't know what he's talking about. There's something familiar about an Ashbery strangeness. It's not like language poetry or nonsense or Dada. You're not just simply coming to it and anything goes. There's a control. There's a trained process of getting at this chaos and this confusion. And I know with his poetry, at least, one of the ways in which he trains his ability to kind of access that is by listening to classical music, because it's a very foreign and pure space in which it's articulating something that you can't otherwise hear. And so I want to know for each of you guys, since you are now bewildered poets, and there's a whole school of bewilderment poetics you created here tonight, where do you go to? How do you access? What provokes you to train yourself to come to the page and shape and bewilder? How do you kind of what's the boot camp for confusion? Or is it a boot camp for confusion?
Can I just ask you, have you ever understood Ashbery? Do you feel like, I have to admit that he's a greatly respected poet. Yeah. I don't understand a line he's ever written.
Yeah, I do understand, and I think I don't think it has anything to understanding, clearly the phone book or anything, but or even another good poem in a different style. But I think it's kind of like you get stoned and you don't know when you got stoned or why you got stoned, but you kind of kept puffing and you had to do it a few times, and then you're kind of bent, and you hope that it's a good high, and some of his poems is kind of, it doesn't go off, but I think when it does, it's kind of like well, man, this stuff's pretty good.
In response to your comment, I will say there's another term that we might as well put on the table, and it's that old Keatsian notion of negative capability. We all know about the sort of state of being in uncertainty and doubts without any irritable grasping after reason. It's this state of unknowing that we can exist in comfortably without any kind of sense of crisis or anxiety. And people always mention negative capability in Keats, but there's something I've given it some thought, and what I realize is that it's never really said explicitly that as far as in poetry goes, Keats probably couldn't have conceived of negative capability being a principle that was I'm moving in a way that
technology disagrees with. Keats never would have conceived of this principle existing in a context that wasn't in some ways formally controlled. That, you know, and probably he was thinking of negative capability existing within an iambic pentameter environment. And there's always going to be this sort of structural, physical structural motif that's going through poems in which you can wander around and be in these states of uncertainty and doubt because there's something underneath it all keeping it a little bit organized. Chaos itself isn't really that mysterious. It's just chaos, right? But if there's a sense of things being organized in a certain way that we can't quite get to the bottom of, that's when things, I'll use your word, I like it now, that's when it's mysterious, you know? And I've often said in my seminars that a pattern suggests deliberation, and deliberation suggests that there may be some meaning for that pattern, you know. And I do find when I encounter a text, if it's written with a palpable sense of its organization, then I think, wait, there's something here. There's some, even if I never get to the bottom of it, I can feel within a text organized in a certain way that there's something afoot. And let me sort of enter into this text and play around and find, and this may be a bit paranoid, but find sort of parallels or find things that seem to chime one against the other. And that's a way of looking at the poem as a whole field of potential meaning rather than this one explicit indicative meaning. But yeah, so I do. I said earlier that I need to organize all the nonsense in my head. But another thing is, I know that in a poem, if you're going to have, if things will be rendered obliquely with a certain amount of negative capability, that really what's very useful for many readers, or for the human mind as I understand it, given, although mind has been proven to be a special case, you do need a foothold, a cognitive foothold, a structural principle that gets repeated and keeps things coherent and makes them at least physically coherent, if not, you know, semantically.
I don't think we really are a school of bewilderment. We're just interested in it. So I don't feel like I can speak for how to become bewildered. I think we're probably all pretty bewildered. But I notice that I'll take on projects that once I understand how to write a poem, I'm no longer interested in it, and I feel slightly sick. So, like, if I had a certain way that I wrote in my first book that I did over and over again and was really confusing to me and exciting, and then I wrote one where I knew exactly how to do it, and I got all the way through it, and I thought, okay, well, I'm done with that. I'll never write that way again. So there are different ways that bewilderment kind of comes into your work. I'm working on a project with an artist, Amy Jean Porter, and I did an erasure of a biography of Charles Lamb. So basically, I would take each page and then find a little tiny poem, or almost like a little haiku on each page. It would be, you know, going through word by word and picking maybe 6 words on a page. And that was bewildering already because I didn't have control over the words, right? So there was this formal structure, and I was finding this little poem within that page. But then I was very excited that when I started working with the artist, she was not at all interested in illustrating them. So if I had, she's there. It became a story about Mary and her little lamb, but they're kind of warped and fall in love and are in madhouses and whatever. But so if I wrote a line that said something like, "Lamb in the midst of the lake destroyed the rainbow," she would not depict that. Instead, she would put this lamb, who is usually a different color than usual, you know, like maybe a pink lamb with his legs shorn up to here, and he would be in a bathtub chomping on a rainbow shower curtain. So like that distance between those two things is really exciting for me. So now every time I get one, I think I'm going to be completely baffled by, you know, what she's chosen because I couldn't picture it. So I think that sometimes for me comes in with collaboration, even if it's collaboration with the self, which is another kind of thing. But
well, I think Timothy had a point when he said that the chaos is not really random. I mean, I don't think it really is physically. You know, chaos is a very predictable structure, so that the unconscious is not necessarily bewildered. You know, stream of consciousness poems tend to be very, very predictable, so that to get to a stage of bewilderness, they probably are bewilderment techniques. I mean, one thing that I think of as very simple is just sort of a change in frame, and the classic might be that you're really emotionally obsessing about something, and then there is a point where you catch yourself obsessing, or you see yourself from another point of view, And those changes, transitional points in the frame of consciousness, are something that, maybe one could start to catch them and explore them.
Yeah. Sorry.
No.
If we were all writing a poem about what's happening here, we might say that we're moving in and out of a state of bewilderment. I'm reminded of a song, some of you would remember it, Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered.
We were going to sing that for you.
That was the finale. You ruined it.
And that song, whether the composer was bewildered and then was inspired to write a song out of his bewilderment, whether we as poets move out of bewilderment into the poem, or whether we move in and out of bewilderment while we're writing the poem, these are questions that seem to be coming out of everything that we're talking about.
We're all occurring at the same time.
Right.
And there probably is, I think, for all of us. I mean, one starts to talk about it as if it were a technique, but I think probably for all of us, there are also very real emotional premises, you know what I mean, so that you are thinking about a specific issue. I mean, a specific challenge for being alive right now, or a relationship with another person, and that.
That's the traditional part. That's the universal part. That always.
Yeah. I don't know if it's traditional.
Well, I don't mean traditional, but at the end, you're getting at experience.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting at memory. You're getting at experience. You're getting at fear. You're getting at humor. But the way you come at it is the innovative and the highly. It's not expressed directly. It's not confessed to directly. It's not. There's the stamp of invention and of I don't like the word experiment, but experimental approach to get at personal experience and to get at memory or love.
I think poetry has always been radical. Sappho is radical. It's a mark of poetry. It's not one generation as opposed to a previous one.
Yeah.
I've been noodling around the word mystery and bewilderment. And it occurs to me that, mystery is something that's outside you. Mystery can induce a state of bewilderment.
Oh, yeah.
Something can be mysterious and bewildering, but you can be in a state of bewilderment, but you're not in a state of mystery usually. The mystery is there, and you're bewildered by it. I don't know. They're sort of different states in a way.
Yeah.
Would I think these the three poems they've selected, I vote, and I'm again, Frank, you can give me your thoughts. Whether we couldn't end, I asked them to select. It would be interesting to select one poem in particular that they are very fond of their own, but also relates to our topic, and it might be interesting to circle and to end on those three poems. Okay, take it away.
Take it away.
Okay.
I feel. Okay, so the poem that I've singled out is a poem called "The New Intelligence," and I'm afraid that if I start talking about it, I don't know when I'm going to stop. Can I see how someone else does it first, and then I'll try? Do you want to? Or
Well, I thought we could really just end on
a reading of it.
Just read. Yes, I'm sorry.
That's totally fine.
Just read the poem.
What if? Could I read another poem?
You have my permission.
I have your permission to. Okay, I'm going to read a poem from the book because I feel I probably should have done that to start with.
Okay.
And and this is a poem called "The Driver of the Car is Unconscious," and this maybe will speak to some of our themes today. And I should note that the title, "The Driver of the Car is Unconscious," I took from a book called German for Beginners. It was a German language book. And there was a kind of Autobahn chapter. And it was supposed to be after a car crash. The driver of the car was unconscious. And this sentence would be useful in that situation. But of course you hear a sentence or you read a sentence like "the driver of the car is unconscious." You can't help but think that he's unconscious while driving the car. And that thought gave me, or pushed me towards this poem. The driver of the car is unconscious. Driver, please, let's slow things down. I can't endure the speed you favor, here where the air's electric hands keep charging everything. A blur of matter fogs the window and my mind to rub it. Don't look now, but the vast majority of chimpanzees on the road's soft shoulder can't determine. Which fascinates more, the thing per se or the decoration on its leaking package? How like us, they. The hand mistook me that arranged my being, bound here, buckled. I have been mistaken, ripped from a wave of in-flight radio, wakened brutally is brutally awakened, plucked from the grip of, asleep on the slope of an open poppy. One has meant this torture for another, clearly. Do we welt the same, make similar whimper? Did he take my name? I'll take another. It is the decoration, by which I mean we have a lot between us. You're European, and I have been to Venice where the waters pave and they can't play tennis. Fair gondolier, it is my pleasure to confess, nor will you ever catch me in athletic dress, hunched waiting at the net for a ball knocked fast in my direction, hot with fervor, to knock it back to the opposing player. It just won't do. Driver, please, I have shared with you. I have become a person. That's supposed to make it hard to hurt me. The future rises, bellows, wrinkles. I can't keep living in a cramped sedan. I won't keep living in a cramped sedan. Though you hold the road, I'll give you that. There are instances of smoke and mirror, instances of shouting fire. Though you hold the road, I'll give you that. There are instances of sticking to it that I can't admire. And ours isn't an adhesion I ever expect to look back on wistfully. But that's for time to decide, not me. Just around the corner, there's a rainbow in the sky. Haven't you ever just had to believe it? Look, if it's a cup of coffee you're after, I bet there's someplace brilliant up ahead. I bet there's someplace right around the bend. Ash in the eye and the nose and the mouth, shit in the pants and the mouth and the hand, hound on the back of the hand in the lap, slap on the face of the hound and the ass. Ash in the eye and the nose and the mouth, mouth on the nose, on the face in the pants, hound on the back of the hand in the lap, shit on the face of the hound in the ass. Ash in the eye and the nose and the mouth won't stop. It comforts itself. It comforts me. Funny, I keep on looking out the window, identifying even as you do this. The orchids cry that yesterday were pollen, ground in the fuzz of dead drunk bees. I will not submit to being ferried that way. Driver, please. Where to now? Tierra del Fuego? There is no travel but the travel that concludes, and shrieking with abandon. Is there? No. What you need is to remember what it felt like beforehand, that emptiness. Call up pictures, melodies, etc., but part of you will resist that assistance, divide from it. Drag the edge of that memory, yes, it's more like forgetting, across that divide, until something like a rabbit hole opens inside you. Vanish into the hole. Vanish. It is your only opportunity. It will stun you for another minute, but when the stunning passes, you will again be nowhere, nothing, and even more at peace with it.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll read Implications for Modern Life again. And what happened with this poem was I had the ham flowers and I was fully denying that I'd made them up. And then suddenly in the poem this horse appeared and everything went to hell. And I had to kind of admit that I was the person behind the poem and the ham flowers in order to save the horse. So it was definitely a poem where I was bewildered by it. Implications for Modern Life. The ham flowers have veins and are rimmed in rind, each petal a little meat sunset. I deny all connection with the ham flowers, the barge floating by loaded with lard, the white flagstones like platelets in the blood-red road. I'll put the calves in coats so the ravens can't gore them, bandage up the cut gate, and when the wind rustles its muscles, I'll gather the seeds and burn them. But then I see a horse lying on the side of the road and think, you are sleeping, I will make you be sleeping. But if I didn't make the ham flowers, how can I make him get up? I made the ham flowers. Get up, dear animal. Here is your pasture flecked with pink, your oily river, your bleeding barn. Decide what to look at and how. If you lower your lashes, the blood looks like mud. If you stay, I will find you fresh hay.
Just
like this number. You can read it, or you can pick another.
I think I'm going to pick another that's
Okay.
more bewildered, but I appreciate
Okay.
that.
Yes, you're right. This is not a bewilderment. This is a very concrete and very.
Yeah. This is a poem about consciousness, and again, this is that theme of seeing what happens if you place consciousness in a setting that's radically different from the human. So this is a poem in the voice of sea creatures. It's called The Granite Coast. We are like you because we scrape these boulders with sharp coiled tongues, which we unroll progressively as our mouths wear out. When you open us, you will find the cliff inside us, though we are tiny as an eyelash. We are like you because we are born by the billions and float into the open ocean, as if we were entering our own plenitude, which is the certainty of death and the slim chance of sunlight, and the ones who never return are the faint roar in a sleeper's ear. We too make little threads mysteriously in our genitals to hold us to the ledge, and in our nests we weave mica and our victims' bones. We are kin to you because the great tides advance and retreat inside us. Though you may call it salvation or adaptation, it is a circle in which the living and the unliving, the souls and anti-souls, grow their intricate spiral shells. We are I. There is only one of us, and with our frail tentacles we build the night sky. We are helpless on this sea full of thinking knives and coral shards nibbled by ravenous flowers. We wage war on ourselves and drift through our armor like cloud shadow. We graze on each other, and the limbs grow back secreting dark sugar. The gull will destroy us, and the plumed worm amphitrite make a home in our eyes. Yet our bodies are shaped exactly like the resting place. We fit in each other like silence in desire. We live another second, or much less than a blink, until the code comes to know itself, and the mind dreams another mind that will survive it, there in the bright curtain of spray.
Further information about our programs and a complete archive of past Philip Tades events is available at philiptades.org.